centre of Oslo is very compact, and all of the interesting places are within an area of 1 square kilometre. The museum area is a short ferry ride from the waterfront. There are museums dedicated to each of Norway's 3 most famous explorers. The first is Fridtjof Nansen, who became a global hero after he crossed the Greenland ice cap on ski, the first major land journey in a polar environment. In June 1881, USS Jeanette was crushed and sunk in the Barents Sea, and its wreckage turned up on the north coast of Greenland 3 years later. This gave Nansen the idea for his next expedition, in which he locked his boat, the Fram, into the Arctic ice and tried to drift across the North Pole. And when he realised that they were going to miss it by 100 miles, he tried to finish the journey on ski. That failed too. He then walked out to Franz Josef Land, where he overwintered before a chance encounter with the Jackson Harmsworth expedition gave him a lift back to Norway. The Polarstern, a floating laboratory for research into global warming, repeated Nansen's journey in 2019 to 2020. The second famous explorer is Roald Amundsen, who had many firsts in the field of exploration. First to overwinter in the Arctic, first ship through the Northwest Passage, first to reach the South Pole, first to reach the North Pole, first to reach both poles. He died in an aircraft crash in the Arctic while searching for his friend Nobile, whose airship had disappeared. Roald Amundsen became famous as the leader of the expedition which first successfully navigated the Northwest Passage. Amundsen cemented his global reputation by beating Robert Falcon Scott in the race to the South Pole. In 1900, after the Belgica expedition, it was clear that Roald Amundsen's next goal would be the Northwest Passage. After obtaining his master's license, he travelled to Germany to seek out the leading authority on magnetic research, George von Neumayer. He agreed to teach Amundsen the necessary science and to make sure that he would have the best scientific equipment for magnetic research with him on the voyage. Amundsen then went to Tromsø in 1901 to purchase the Goa. During the next 2 years, he prepared for the expedition and restored, strengthened and equipped the Goa. On a rainy June 16, 1903, Goa and her small, tightly knit crew slipped out of Christiania and headed for the North Sea. After 2 stops on the west coast of Greenland, at Godhavn for dogs and clothing the Inuit made for them, and Dalrymple Rock to pick up a pre-arranged depot of supplies, the Goa sailed into Lancaster Sound and on 22nd of August reached Beechey Island, the last safe winter harbour of the Franklin expedition. From Beechey Island they sailed down Peel Sound and into Simpson Strait. The strait was free of ice westwards, and he could have continued through the Northwest Passage in only 1 season. Instead, Amundsen was looking for a good wintering place, where he had already decided to stay for 2 years. He found a small harbour which he named Godhavn, at the right distance from the location of the magnetic North Pole for a fixed magnetic station. They then began the task of unloading the cargo and establishing their new home. Near the end of October 1903, a small band of Inuit appeared at Godhavn. Soon an Inuit village grew nearby. These were Netsiliks, the most isolated of the Canadian Inuit. Amundsen immediately made friends with them, and a 2-year amicable relationship started. The Norwegians learned their language and were able to communicate fully with the Inuit. The friendliness and generosity of the Inuit was repaid by the white men's goodwill and respect. The Inuit taught the Norwegians how to make igloos, how to make the sledge runners slide at very low temperatures, the art of dressing warmly in loose furs, and how to drive dogs. The Norwegians provided the Inuit with knives, needles, matches, other tools of wood and metal, and food when needed. They hunted together, and a number of Inuit assisted in the Norwegians' daily chores. Amundsen was especially fascinated with these people and their incredible survival skills. He spent a lot of time studying all aspects of their culture and gathering a large collection of artifacts that included clothing, hunting tools, utensils, kayaks and sledges. His diary gives great insight into the life of the Netsilik Inuit in the early 1900s. The crew gathered data in a number of scientific fields, but it was magnetic observations that were the most important. 8 magnetic field stations were operated during the stay, 4 in the neighbourhood of Gohaven and 4 further away in Boothia Felix. Several sledging parties went out to survey coastlines and make scientific observations. In 1904, Amundsen and Ristvik located the magnetic pole on Boothia Peninsula. Amundsen was the first to demonstrate that the North Magnetic Pole does not have a permanent location, but moves its position in a fairly regular manner. In addition, his carefully organised measurements were the first and only observations of the Earth's magnetic field in the northern polar regions until modern polar observatories were established decades later. It is a testimony to the scientific abilities of Amundsen himself and his crew that they designed and carried out the first continuous magnetic variations recordings inside the high Arctic for a period of 19 months under extremely difficult conditions. On August 13, 1905, they began the difficult navigation of Simpson Strait. With one man in the crow's nest, and another constantly sounding with the lead, Goa steered through a succession of narrow passages, shoals and ice. On August 17th, Amundsen and his crew had taken Goa through the unsolved link of the Northwest Passage, the part which had never been traversed by a ship. A few days later, a vessel came in sight. Amundsen said, "The Northwest Passage is done, my boyhood dream." At that moment it was accomplished. Amundsen was eager to proceed westwards, but at King Point the ice barred further progress and the Norwegians reluctantly settled down for a third winter. The next step was to get the news to the press. The nearest telegraph office was in Fort Egbert, outside Eagle City, Alaska, which was a 1,300-kilometre sledge trip away. On the 12th of March 1906, Amundsen arrived back at Herschel Island, having travelled over 2,600 kilometres by ski and dog sledge. He brought the personal letters from family and friends to the men, in addition to the news of Norway's newfound independence. At this point, Wilk was seriously ill and died a few days later. In July, Goa got underway on the last stage of her voyage. On 30th of August, as they entered the Bering Strait, the men gathered on the deck and drank a toast to the final accomplishment of the Northwest Passage by ship. The third famous explorer is Thor Heyerdahl, who was a zoologist and geographer who wanted to show that primitive people could have made long boat journeys to populate distant lands. On the first ski jump built on the Holmenkollen site in 1892, the ski jumpers attained a distance of 21.5 metres in the air. Over the years, the takeoff facilities have been progressively improved, and today the jumpers can travel 132.5 metres in the air. Gustav Vigeland is Norway's only famous sculptor, and his work can be seen in Frogner Park, a short tram ride from the city centre. The theme of his work is the upward struggle of mankind. The monolith is carved out of a single granite block. The roof of the Opera House is a popular place for a stroll. Fredrikstad lies 56 miles south of Oslo and is Norway's sixth city with a population of 76,000. It was founded in 1567 and is Northern Europe's best preserved fortified town.